and a very warm welcome to the Journey Journals at Life of Gaia. My name is Gaia, and as always, this is the channel where we explore journeys into the unknown to discover ourselves. Now, today, I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking to a fascinating lady who, amongst other things, has 2 master's degrees. She's an educator, she's a coach, she has her own business, she's trained with Deepak Chopra's team, and many other things, but most importantly, she has an absolutely fascinating personal story, which I'm excited to share with you and to speak to her about, and you'll see will unfold as we move through the interview. So Carolina, with your permission, I would love to dive straight into your story, and I'd love you to take us back like right to the beginning and where your story actually begins. And if you don't mind, sharing your current age now. I know some people feel a bit weird about that, and what age you were when this all started to unfold.
It's funny that you asked me that question before, if I feel weird. And I think the reason why I don't feel weird is because when you hear my story, you'll understand why, for me, every year is a miracle and a gift. I'm 44 years old. And I was diagnosed at 26 with a very rare type of cancer. It was called GIST, gastrointestinal stromal tumor. Extremely rare, not only in the general population, but for a woman my age to have a tumor that was attached to my small intestine that was 8 pounds big. So that started so many journeys for me. And I was only 26, like I mentioned, so I was recently married. I was kind of like in the peak of my career, starting to become a dyslexia therapist in the middle, almost done with my 2 master's degrees, and actually ready to have a family and have babies. And I ended up with an 8-pound tumor instead of a baby. And I joke about that now sometimes because I should have named it because it was that big. And that started a lot of not only transformative things for me, but it really put me on my spiritual path. A little soon after, thanks to mindfulness, actually. So yes, that's when the diagnosis started. Is really when I feel I rebirthed in a way. It's kind of like, it seems like it should be the opposite way, but that's when it happened for me.
Carolina, what were you feeling sort of emotionally, mentally, physically when you got this news? Because I mean, that's a very young age.
When I first got the news, honestly, I went straight into dissociation, that was a bit of my MO my whole life because of trauma. And now looking back, I almost feel that it helped me at first because I was able to detach from the fear a little bit. I was still very scared and very anxious. And I remember, going through many, many dark night of the soul where I couldn't sleep, right, for days out of fear of what was going to happen to me. But the main thing that I felt at that age, I think, is this need to keep on going, right? It was like, this is not going to this is not going to kill me. I was giving very few months to live after if I didn't take the oral chemo that then I took for 12 years. But I just felt this, part of it, I think it was a little bit of the fear, but also something inside me that now I guess I describe of like some of it was a bit of a calling, and even I know there was something bigger connected to this telling me don't worry, like it was like just keep on going, keep on moving. But at that age also I was extremely confused. Most people that had the type of cancer that I had were like in their even 80s. So for me to find people that understood me was a little hard at the beginning, but then I found the Life Raft group that is my support group today, where, they sent me the chemo, they connected me with my doctors, and they were like my angels, right? So I felt that being that young in a way was good for me in the sense that I had still the vitality to at least ask for help, to still work, right? I was still, even with chemo, was still working, and God, I mean, 4 years into it, I adopted a child and did all these I finished my 2 master's degrees, and don't ask me what I learned the last 6 months because I don't remember any of it. But there was a lot of of that, a bit of that energy in me because I guess I was that young, but I was also very, very confused.
Carolina, taking us back to the 12 years that this was all happening, can you tell us a little bit about the organization that you mentioned, and also the what was it like going through chemotherapy and, the cancer treatments and all of that? What was that like for you?
So the cancer treatment itself was a little brutal. I mean, it's the best word I can describe it, because that type of cancer tumor doesn't respond to, your typical, the IV chemo that you see most cancer
Okay.
patients go through. So they prescribed medication that it was a miracle drug for me, especially at the beginning, called Gleevec. And I had to take a very high dose because I was very high risk of metastasizes because of a lot of reasons, right? I don't want to get into the science behind it, but I had to take a very strong dose daily. And that was my main, what they call adjuvant therapy, because I didn't have a tumor. I did go through it extracted the tumor from me because it was so big. I mean, I could have not made it. It wasn't that big. I was already having infections. I had to have 2 transfusions because of surgery and hemorrhaging, and there was just a lot involved. So after they took it out, they did give me this really high dose to maintain me alive, pretty much. And I did that for 12 years until one day I decided that I just didn't want to live like that anymore. I was getting very fatigued. My thyroid was starting to get very affected. My kidneys were starting to not, work properly. And I was living like a zombie. I'm still, after 8 years from taking the medication, still detoxing from it. I still have chronic fatigue and a bit of brain fog from it. So it's been an interesting journey, and I know that I'm still healing from it. And I'm at the same time very thankful for Gleevec, because I don't know where I would have been, and I followed my intuition with that too, when I started and when I needed to stop.
Absolutely. And Carolina, at any point in all of this, did you ever feel like just giving up, or, that it was too much, or that, or did you maintain that conviction that you had at the beginning that everything was going to be okay?
That is a very good question, Gaia. And it's one of those questions that you don't always want to go to because you rather remember what was your motor, right? But I appreciate you asking me that question, because sometimes we do need to remind ourselves of the contrast, right? It's like the minute, when you decide to keep on going, and sometimes the times that you don't. I think for me, the giving up I can remember one incident where I was extremely, because of the fatigue, it creates a lot of depression too. And I was very anxious. I mean, I used to live my life 6 months at a time. Every scan they would tell me I would breathe again, because I had another 6 months where I knew the tumor wasn't back, and it wasn't back. And I tried to always, go back to everything that I was learning and even teaching to others, right? The mindfulness, the gratitude, all these things. But in the moment, we call it scanxiety in the cancer world, right? When we had the scanxiety, those are the times that I would get really down. Like even going here to Sylvester and sitting at the hallway, even now, gives me a reaction. Like I get nauseous, because it's like. And there was one time where I was extremely depressed. I was living in Bolivia with my son, recently divorced, going through a really hard time in a new relationship, and I was extremely fatigued. This is when I realized that there was a lot of hormonal things going on with me because of the chemo. So I was in a lot of up and downs emotionally, and I hit rock bottom one time, and I couldn't get out of bed, right, for weeks. I was tired. In every single way. And it really was my kid that constantly made me get out of bed. But one time I just, one of those days that you're just like, so much easier to just give up. And of course, I did never allow myself to, get fully there. But and again, my kid has always been my main motor to keep on going. But I felt that I needed to go there. That's why they call them dark nights of the soul, right? Because after that, there's a really nice, it's almost like, you can only go up, right? Like they say. And you just lift yourself up. And I remember right after that is when I ended up in Brazil with John of God, and I after did my ayahuasca ceremony and all those things that came after.
So a little bit like the breakdown that occurs before the breakthrough.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Amazing. What an ordeal. And really, I want to take a moment to just thank you for, sharing so openly and, for sharing it vulnerably. And like, I get how difficult it was and how challenging and probably how overwhelming it was at times. So thank you for just sharing what was so. So Carolina, at a certain point, like, you went through these 12 years of chemotherapy, you were exhausted, your body was taking a toll, but then you got to a point, and it sounds like you consciously made a different choice, right? Can you tell us about what that choice was and what led you to making that choice?
So you described it perfectly. Right after the breakdown, the breakthrough came. And I remember the day that I woke up, and the decision was for me to stop my medication. And not because of the physical aspect, it was because of my codependence with it. I was
Okay.
like, I was holding on so much to the idea that if the only way I survived was with the medication, that I wasn't really taking care of myself in other ways at that point. I had been on and off, like the meditation and mindfulness and yoga and all these other things. But at that point, when that happened at the time, I was just really relying on that. And I was in a very toxic relationship too. So I just felt the need to, if I was going to detox from this medication, I needed to do it full circle, right? Mind, body, soul detox.
Okay.
And so it really was a decision to get rid of this medication that for me represented a little bit of this, the fear of death, the fear of holding on to something, deciding from the moment not to live from fear, but live from love, right? When you're surviving versus thriving. I think that's how I describe surviving versus thriving. When we survive, we're constantly, right, trying to get back on that surf or whatever it is, that paddle to get on the storm. When you really, or you're just surfing the storm, but when you decide to do it from love and you thrive, you're actually enjoying the journey. And even when it's really hard, right? You just kind of get up and you start surfing again. It doesn't matter what's happening around you. So it was that moment of choosing to leave the medication for me that I knew I was going to, it was a leap of faith. It was the biggest leap of faith of my life, right? Because there was all the odds were against me at that time. Yeah.
Just backtracking a little bit about what you were saying about the choice of living and living in a specific way. I remember I once did a leadership course where the leader was explaining to us that she often got people in her course that were diagnosed with a terminal illness, right? And she explained to us how the minute, a person gets that information, right, they start living like they're dying instead of living like they're living. And I thought it was such an interesting distinction. I mean, I don't know, I can't even imagine how challenging it must be, to get that type of information and not sort of go into the difficulty and the challenge of it and all of that. And so it was her job to sort of get them into the mode of living like they're living instead of living like they're dying.
You're right. And it's funny, because I had heard the same term many times in some other workshops I went, and I'm glad you said it. It was funny. I was about to say it and it didn't come out because I feel that sometimes it does remind me of the time of when I was living for dying. And that is like, it was exhausting. Honestly, the reason now looking back, I'm really having this epiphany as I'm saying it. I think the reason I was so tired, had nothing to do with the chemo. It was because of that. It was because I was living, because it takes now that I work so much with energy, right? What mainly takes and drains our energy is there are thoughts and how we feel about life, right? So if I was constantly fearful and constantly feeling that I had to live and I had to live and I had to live, and even when you say I have to live for my kid, right? It was in my head, it was still not for me. It was still not just because I wanted to thrive and I wanted to live a life that was different. And I am, like, looking back, I am very proud of myself of even that young, seeing that distinction. I'm mentoring a couple of cancer patients that are terminal. And the first thing they ask me is, what's the number one thing that I should do first? And I tell them it's as simple as asking for help. Because then you learn these things from people. Because like, for example, I'm never going to forget the first retreat I went was in Austin with a beautiful woman that now is like super famous out there in the cancer community. Her name is Chris Carr, and she told me, she said by me, and I remember we talked about it, and I was like bawling. I was barely diagnosed, I think 6 months, and she goes, and I was crying, and I was like, sorry. She goes, no, actually, the more you cry, the more you're going to heal. I'm like, what do you mean? And she said, have you read these articles that talk about the emotional connection to cancer and that disease of emotions, right? I'm like, what are you talking about? Because at that point, I only knew that cancer was in my family, and not that type, but it was very common in my family, and that probably I just messed up my body somehow. And when she said that to me, it was a breakthrough. So this beautiful how when we're open is, these messages come to us.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Carolina, so then you got to a point where, you had this turning point and you made, this very conscious decision to stop all treatment, which is incredibly brave. And what happened next?
Oh my God, yeah, that's the thing that you ask me that question, I get chills because it's like everything, right? Careful what you wish for, they say. Because I remember, so when I stopped the chemo, I was actually getting ready a couple of years before, not in a very direct way, but I mentioned this to you before. There was one of my really good friends and shamans. His name is Juan Manuel. He's in Bolivia. He's a Bolivian shaman. He told me, he's like, I'm going to prepare you to detox from this, but you're not. He don't say me, but you're not ready right now. Because again, he's the one that did the mind, body, soul type of detox with me, right? That helped me with it. And so I decided to talk to my oncologist here, who said to me, I know you are intuitive enough, and it's crazy that a doctor this side of the world would say that, right? I trust you with this. And because I thought he was going to be like, okay, then see, I'm not, there's too much risk. I don't want to even have these patients. I really thought I was going to lose my doctor. And he was there for me the whole time. So I decided to do ayahuasca as my main way of detoxing, again, my mind, body, and soul. So Juan Manuel prepared me for about almost a year. No, a little bit less, sorry, about 6 months. We waited for my next scan. I actually had to get off, and I always tell people when doing ayahuasca, right, I had to get off some medication because I was taking some for anxiety, especially because I had chronic anxiety as I was a kid. Can you imagine with all the diagnosis, I was, really suffering from it. And that was the hardest part for me, by the way, was leaving that, the only little pill that made me feel better, I thought, which was not true. But so he prepared me in many ways. I did moon and sun ceremonies. He would tell me to jump out of a cliff, or go jump out of a cliff. It was like, because I really wanted to detox. And then ayahuasca came to my life, and then this whole portal opened. Literally, I opened a portal in my life.
But
So
Carolina, before we
yeah,
go into that portal, I just have one question for you, because those are two radically different approaches to the same
yes,
thing, right? Like you couldn't get further apart.
yeah.
And so, would you mind explaining, first of all, for the people who don't know, what an ayahuasca ceremony is and what that entails? Yeah, if we could start with that.
Yeah, no, of course. And I'm glad you asked that question, because and it is something that now is becoming more popular. At that time, actually, when I did it, wasn't as popular. It is in Bolivia because, a lot of people go to South American countries to have ceremonies. So I'm going to give you the definition of, at least of kind of from my experience, and also what I've learned. Okay. Because I know there's different, even with that, right? Shamans that do different ceremonies, but the one that at least I attended, so what they do is ayahuasca is found right in the Amazonic jungle mainly. It is, a plant, and they've mixed it with other things, because it's not just that. They have their own little secret. It's funny, some shamans have really secret things they do, right? And they prepare it with a lot of like rituals and love and intentions, and they pray over it, right? And then with ayahuasca, which is actually what it does, it activates probably the most powerful, right, is it a hormone? I'm making it, I think it is a DMT, right? In our brain.
Yes, dimethyltryptamine.
Which, you know, from what I understand, at least when the shaman explained to us, right, it's mainly activated at birth and death. So what it does for people, it is considered a type of shadow work out there because it is also activated in death. Literally what we're doing is having a near-death experience, right, without dying or getting totally there. So most people will see their shadows in their face, right? And that's why it's not always, you know, because I've had people ask me that question. I said, it's not something you would go to like a whatever ceremony and with whoever shaman, like it's, you know, you at least, well, that's why Juan prepared me for 3 years. He knew I was, first of all, very sensitive. They called me the Ayahuasca Express in Bolivia because it took me 5 minutes to react it. Everyone else, 20 minutes, 45 minutes later, they were still waiting for the reaction. And I'm like, well, already my and it does detox your body in an amazing way. That's why people do go through nausea and sometimes, you know, throwing up and all these other things. So it's funny when you explain ayahuasca ceremonies, people get super scared. I was terrified, but I can say that for me, it was what I needed at the time I mean, 100% is, you know, what calls me. And that's another thing. Ayahuasca really is one of those things, like we say, it calls you.
Yes.
It is not for everyone. I said in my case, I had to leave medication. I had to do a diet, right? You have to prepare your body. So, you know, the really good shamans will actually tell you to have a certain diet for at least a couple of weeks before. They want to prepare you in every single way before you do something like this.
Yeah, and 100% agreed with you. And you know, it's so interesting, the whole discussion around ayahuasca, and that finally it is sort of becoming more mainstream because, you know, my experience also the first time was 2014, and it was by far the most profound experience I've ever had in my life. And it was absolutely life altering. And as a consequence, I did a whole lot of research into it. And it was so interesting to find that, you know, dimethyltryptamine, the active ingredients, is the one compound that is present in animals, plants, and human beings already naturally. And that, you know, on death, like you were mentioning, a lot of it gets released into your brain, which I find fascinating, you know, that it could possibly contribute to, you know, the near-death experience in general. But anyway, so you spent all this time with the shaman in preparation for your very first ceremony and journey. Can you take us to that moment of, because I know a lot of times it's filled with a lot of apprehension and fear and all sorts of other stuff. So I would love to hear what the experience was for you.
I'm laughing because I remember, I mean, mind you, I'm prepared for this 3 years, right? So I go in, I'm like, I'm ready. And I sit down and the first thing I look is, where's the exit? Like literally, I'm like, oh no, where's it? He's like, you're not leaving. I'm like, what do you mean I'm not leaving? What if I want to leave? You're not, right? I'm said, and finally, because I was throwing a bit of a tantrum, I got really scared. And it's crazy because, you know, most people, there were some people that were there that were new. They were anxious, but not as scared. And I was feeling super like self-conscious. I mean, come on. I mean, what are you scared of? You just left your chemo, you went through cancer. But then I decided in home, and he helped me with that. It's like, be kind to yourself, because I knew what it would mean. I think subconsciously what it was going to mean for me. So I think I was like, okay, brace yourself, because I did. I mean, you know, after that, I really need to brace myself. So pretty much, you know, with my shaman, like he said, okay, listen, would it help you to sit by me? Because there was about 25 people in the room, and we did it at home. Usually he used to do it like more in nature. And that day, just for me, he did it at home in one of my friends' houses, because he felt that probably it would have been a lot with everything around me. And I'm very, very sensitive. So he wanted my energy to be a little contained and just have that internal experience instead of relying on nature. Because funny, one of the things that happened in the ceremony is I just wanted to go hug a tree, because I wanted to ground from the experience. And he helped me ground because they blow tobacco right on you, and like they do different things to kind of help you go through the process and not make it so hard, because it is. And for me, I mean, to sum it up, it was actually, and he laughed at me after. He's like, you were so scared. And from all 25 people here, it was the most loving and gentle with you from everyone. So what I did,
Carolina, sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you. Do you know what at the time, like, do you know what was generating the fear or the feeling of being scared, or what was coming up for you that generated that?
For me, it was always fear of death. You know,
Mm,
of course, me, I mean, I wanted to have a lot of control. So I've read every single book, article, documentary. First thing I Googled, how many have died from this, right? So, and yeah, there are deaths from ayahuasca. You know, I mean, the very few, and usually for people that are being very responsible. Like I said, you have to know what you're doing. But still, I think, and you know what it was though? It was funny. I think like in a superficial way, it was a fear of death. I think internally, now looking back, it was more a fear of living. There's a whole story behind that. You know, I think I was so used to being in the comfort zone of like being in that survival mode that going
wow.
into the thriving mode was scary for me.
It sounds like you had an incredible shaman by your side, you know, who was able to sort of get into your space and
Yeah.
understand what you needed on a comfort level. And then you went ahead with it.
I went ahead with it, probably threw up for an hour straight. I don't remember time that much, but I remember that from everyone I had the physically I detoxed a lot because I had 12 years of chemo in my body.
Yeah.
And even when you don't have anything to throw up, I was still going through the detoxing. It's funny, it was weird. I could feel the medication coming out of my hands and my sweat, right? I was sweating profusely.
Mm,
And then, which I usually never sweat. It was crazy. I opened myself to detox, and I really did. So our mind is so amazing, guy. I know you know that, but just as a reminder, our mind's really crazy. And then I had like some past life experiences in it. I even felt chains in my feet to the point that when I left the place, my ankles would hurt like they were bruised. It was crazy. It was like people talk about this a lot, and I'm like, you don't believe me, right?
yeah.
And then I had a full blown I was at that time I was doing inner child work with one of my therapists, and when I say one of my therapists, I mean that I had a team. I had a psychologist, psychiatrist, a shaman, a coach. You know, like I really did that on purpose, right? Because I knew this was going to be a stage of my life that I really wanted the right people around me.
Right.
And I did inner child work with the ayahuasca. So everyone that I feel that I needed to either have an interaction, forgive, or close the cycle came to me. So I had like an hour conversation with each person, including my parents. It was really, so some people, right, other people had total death type of things. And for me, it was more forgiveness and compassion and inner child work. It was beautiful. It was what I needed at the time.
Amazing. Can you say a little bit more about the sort of past life experiences that you experienced within the journey?
Yeah. So the first one, and I guess, you know, it's funny because usually with all these things, you probably have explored it before a little bit, or sometimes they show up, which I think it can be scary. But since Juanito had prepared me about 3 years for this, we did do a little past life regression before, like months before. So I guess I needed to heal that too, right? Because I came up immediately. So I was sitting in the chair, and we had talked, and I've always felt very connected with slavery in some ways. Like I've always, you know, I don't know why I would get dreams with it. There's a lot of codependency that I had to go through in my life that I felt that probably wasn't just mine. And codependency from this place of belonging to something or someone, like something was owned me. And that's the type of marriage I had, you know, so it was interesting how I could just connect all of that. And when I was sitting, all of a sudden, like I tried to get out of my
Carolina,
chair.
sorry, just for the people,
Yeah,
sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you, but just
no,
do you
please.
mind saying just 2 or 3 words about codependency for people who don't necessarily understand what it is?
So codependency is when you are so dependent. It can be on you had a drug, alcohol, a person, shopping. We all have addictions. So it is comparable to addictions because that's how it shows up. But when
Okay.
you're so dependent of something that it's very toxic, right? You lose yourself. That's where the word codependent, right? And when it comes to attachment style theory, it usually comes with this ancient attachment where you cannot live without something. pretty much. I think it's comparable to an addiction in some ways.
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that question. You're right. Sorry, I mean, sometimes my terms from my self-help books will show up.
There's so many different avenues and
I know.
rabbit holes that you can go
Yeah.
down.
No, I know.
And fascinating.
So I remember that I tried at one point, I literally did, because I asked, the shaman if I had done this, because you're conscious, but you're not. It's weird, right? You're in between in and out. So I try to get out of my chair, and boom, I got pulled up, and I would get pulled down by literally and then when I look down, there were like the chains like slaves had, right? Like chains to the, and I would pull my ankles and try to like move my legs, and I couldn't. And then I saw myself as a man in the chair, right? Like trying to get out of there. And he would cry and sob and ask for someone to liberate him. Like, just please, I just want to be free. Please, I just want to be free. The crazy thing about the word free.
You're giving me goosebumps, by the
way. No, it was insane. The thing about free is that when people ask me, I remember since I could remember, probably since I was a kid, when people ask you, so what makes you happy? I would always answer, to be free. So that day it made sense to me, because I felt that he only wanted to do is be free, right? And then I went into the inner child work, and then in the middle of my journey, I saw myself as it was door. It was a red door, and I always had, since I was a kid, a recurring dream of red doors, always. And I used to think it was, I love red. It's my color, right? And it's funny because for me it's very grounding, because it's from the root chakra too. But so I would always open two doors. So it was two, not just one. So I always used to think it was my house, a pretty house with a red door. And I'll tell you about what happened later on in India. But then I discovered that the door was me as a person from India that was in a monastery, that, the monasteries in India have red doors. Yeah. And I would open them, and then I would see the Buddha, right? Like a shrine, like a temple type of thing. So I went through that experience for a little bit. And I was actually, I went into meditative mode and meditation. And in the middle of my ayahuasca experience, I started meditating. It was so weird, because you're already in a different state of mind. It was the most awkward thing. But it was really, that's when I started actually going from the darkness of the experience to light. Like that meditation kind of brought me to the other side. And it was that life of as a monk, which I always used to kid around too about me being a monk my whole life. And the Buddha, I have him everywhere. Nowadays I do practice Buddhism, but I've always very attracted to Buddha. As a little, I would always have little Buddhas in my room. Right? So yeah, I guess I confirmed that the doors were a monastery for me.
Incredible. And so, the nature of plant medicine experiences and plant medicine ceremonies, I think in general have a sort of very sacred component to them, or feeling to them, or at least that's been my experience. And I wanted to ask you, during your whole ceremony, and it sounds like there were a lot of profoundly sacred moments in your ceremony. Is there one or two that stands out in particular as a sacred moment for you?
Yes, I think one of them was when I went through that experience of talking to people in my life that I felt that I needed to close cycles of forgive myself through. It was like everyone I was seeing was through a mirror. It was like not a person like you and me right now talking, even on Zoom, but it was like a mirror put in front of me, and the person's face would come out. So for me, it was very symbolic, because it was showing me that person that had really hurt me in my life, right? That I felt victimized from, but it was really showing my reflection. It was crazy. That part was insane. And I don't know if you heard of the Ho'oponopono, but it's a Hawaiian prayer.
Yes, the Hawaiian prayer. It's beautiful.
It came up to me. So at the end, and I say that's sacred because Ho'oponopono is a prayer, right? It's literally a prayer for forgiveness and self-compassion and many other things. I have my manual here that sometimes I use with clients because it's very powerful.
And it's a very simple prayer. It's just,
thank you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. Yeah. I actually have my band says that has a Ho'oponopono here. It's really funny. I really connected with it because it's a beautiful way of, at the end is I love you, right? So in that, and it's not that you just say it like repeating like a parrot, and that's the hardest part to repeat. I remember the Ho'oponopono, I would always say, thank you, I'm sorry, forgive me, and I could never go to I love you. And for certain people, right, that I was working on. And that day with ayahuasca, so the mirror would show up with a person, I would have a conversation, I mean, like an hour conversation with each about what happened, and they would defend themselves in the arena. And then at the end, I would look at them and say, thank you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you. And then the next person, which it was really awkward. And it was sacred because I felt that I was clearing, right, so much in that exercise. I mean, probably lifetimes, many lives of these karmic, I do believe in karmic relationships where you really are in a way cord cutting things, right? So that was one of them. And I'm trying to, the other one was the inner child, like I was mentioned earlier, I think it was the inner child work. I felt that really reconnected myself to that part of me that was healing. I unfortunately experienced sexual abuse at 5. So for me to connect with a 5-year-old, again, because I remember this was almost towards the end. I was sitting there and in my head, I just want to get out of it. I was exhausted. You know, it's just, I was doing the 6 hours. And I remember even asking at some point, I'm gonna just like put the tobacco on my face because I was just tired. And then my little girl showed up, like curly hair, like super cute. And she just came up and literally climbed on my lap. And I'm like, what the heck are you doing? It really startled me.
You're not done yet.
No. But the beautiful thing about that is that she wasn't upset. She wasn't sad. She was like, okay, I'm ready. Let's just do this. Let's play. We're good. Let's move on, right? And I played with her for a little while, and it was really beautiful. So I felt this reconnection. And when people ask me what's the main thing I felt after, I never in my life dissociated again. I did a couple of times of really fearful events that happened to me after for a little bit, but it was very easy for me to come back to my body. And for anyone doesn't know what dissociation is really when you literally, what happens is your nervous system, right? Your sympathetic nervous system, what it does, it goes into freeze, flight, freezer, right? Or literally get out of the right or good room mode.
Right.
Yeah. And your brain, what it does to protect you, it almost like it becomes a bit of more of it in your body, right? You almost have a bit of an out of body experience, so you don't live the traumatic experience fully. So I think when I did the inner child work, for me it was sacred because after that I didn't feel like she had to run away. That's why I was dissociated, because she would run away from me. So it was part of me that wasn't connected. So my sense had got, I know this probably happened to you, like I could see, hear, smell, and touch and everything. I for the first time felt things. I got
like on steroids.
I could smell things because the chemo affected my sense of smell. And even now I don't smell things fully, but I actually was smelling again. And I have horrible eyesight, so, but I didn't have contacts. I took my glasses out and I could see like 20/20 for like about a month. It was insane, like what had happened at that point. So yeah, it was definitely a sacred experience.
Incredible. And Carolina, would you mind explaining just a little bit more about inner child work and how that all takes place and what that's all about?
Yeah, so inner child work is very popular right now. Actually, I got trained with it myself to coach with it because I felt like because of that experience with ayahuasca. So what happens is you usually, and there's different I guess levels to do inner child work. There's a spectrum there, right? I do in a more subtle way because we know I'm not a therapist, but what I do is, or the way I did it too is, you choose usually an age or a few ages, right, of a traumatic experience, or where you feel that there was a before and after in your childhood, right? It doesn't have to be a huge trauma like it, in my case, or it can be even things like, hey, my parent left me at a store for 2 hours, and that created a sense of. So so from there we recognize what we call there's different terms for this, but it really is like a deep wound, not to throw more therapy terms, but it is like your deepest wound, your shadow wound, right? And with that shadow wound, you start looking at what behavior, what did you feel at the moment that continues to show up in your life? Like for me, for example, quick example, like when the abuse happened for me, of course, actually for me in my head, and what happens with abuse in children is you have a near-death experience, right? Because
Oh, interesting.
there's a lot, there's a lot of, a part of you disconnects because you can't make sense out of it.
Sure.
And there's a lot of shame and guilt. There's so many other emotions that come with that. But for me, it was the sense, there was a what they call it, toxic, almost like affirmations that you start telling yourself, right? It's a toxic one because it's not good for you. For me, it was, I don't belong. I don't belong here. And I always suffered from sense of belonging everywhere I go, because I had disconnected from my body and my mind and the soul level when that happened to me. So for me, I always had to constantly work on belonging, and therefore I wouldn't feel heard or seen. So it's very complicated, but the work is simple in a way. You just go back to your childhood, you start looking at your belief systems, at the feelings behind it, at the emotions, and you start slowly working on each of those. And at the end of the day, it's not that you take away or you totally cure your deep wound. It's just, you almost like accept it the way it is, and you rewrite a story as an adult with that information.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of us walk around in adult bodies today, but really there's just, it's a little kid walking around in an adult body. And
if you ever see me throwing a tantrum, it's my vibe. No, but it's funny. I mean, we're laughing about it, but I would sometimes throw tantrums, especially we work a lot through our partners with inner child without knowing, right?
Yes.
So I would throw tantrums and I would be embarrassed, but then I realized where it was coming from. It was not me. Blame it on the 5-year-old, right? Yeah.
So you had your ayahuasca experience. Thank you for sharing it with us, and especially so openly. How did the experience on the whole sort of change you physically, mentally, emotionally, like immediately after, and where you are now, however many years later?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think earlier about the years. I think it's been 8 years. Well, I'm not with chemo 8 years. So yeah, it's been about a little less, like almost 7.5 years that I've did the experience. And it's funny I say 7.5, and it feels like it's 40 because so much has happened since then. So immediately, like I told you, I literally opened a portal because physically, like I said, all my senses were super intensified. I've always been a very sensitive person, and even emotionally, that was probably one of the hardest things at the beginning, that I was feeling my feelings. If I felt them before, because I always had like 100%, this was 300%. So I had to have a lot of help and coaching and therapy after on how to process. That's another thing that, by the way, is super important for people to understand. After these things, you really need to process a lot and help with it too. If most of the time you do need the help, or something, there's other ways you can do it yourself. But so on a mind level, I felt that I was a lot more clear. I had a lot of questions during the ceremony, like even with the past life stuff, right? Like, what does this mean? Or like, I'm a little girl. Why are you so upset all the time? And I got a lot of answers. So there was a lot of clarity. And the main thing that was clear, and for me that was a breakthrough, was that I had made the right choice with my medication, because I was terrified. I wasn't sleeping for months. I'm like, what if I do die? What if it comes back and everyone's going to tell me I told you so? I think I was more worried about that. And I don't know. It felt that, I felt free. That's speaking of the word, right? I felt I had freedom. And I think it was not even 6 months after. I might have the timeline wrong because it was just like a dream right now. I went to John of God in Brazil to get a spiritual surgery, which has also changed my life.
Can you tell us who that is, or what, for the people who aren't familiar?
So it is very controversial right now if you Google him, but that's another topic. But John of God is João de Deus in Portuguese. He is a Brazilian medium.
Okay.
And what he does is give spiritual surgeries, and there's different saints, there's different doctors from other lives, right, that work through him. And honestly, when I went there, I was the most skeptical person. I had heard about him through Oprah, in the Oprah show a couple times before, because she used to go all the time to see him, and she interviewed him, and So he became, I think, very famous also in the world because of that too. And the shaman used to take people, and they call it La Casa de San Ignacio, right? The name where he lived. And I went with a group of Bolivians, and oh my God, I saw kids in wheelchairs, and actually they had stayed with me in the hotel. So I know the word fake of children walking from being paralyzed for years, of people telling stories that had been in the third time just to kind of maintenance, right? Like surgeries, because he had reduced and got rid of their tumors, and show me scans right before and afters of right after coming from the house, and cancer's disappearing. And I thought that I was going to have a surgery there for the cancer that was not really in my body anymore. But then it's interesting, and I kind of got my butt kicked, excuse my language, because he actually had me stay longer. And everyone was laughing at me in the group. Everyone left, including the shaman, and they left me alone in this little town in Abidania, Brazil. And it was on Good Friday when I had my surgery, which was really, really beautiful, because there was so much amazing energy that day from people that were listening. And it was crazy. He does the spiritual surgery where he really doesn't touch you, but then the other surgeries, he will he will cut you. People don't bleed. And I saw this with my own eyes. It was just, I thought I was going crazy, because I was like, this is insane. So it was a very beautiful experience. And I even detoxed more from the chemo. Like the day before the surgery, I went through every single side effect again. I hadn't been taking my medication for 6 months, but I felt the medication in my body because it surfaces, right? And then after the surgery, I literally felt stitches in my stomach for about a month. No one ever touched me. Oh, I went through 3 days that I couldn't get out of bed because it was like a surgery. I'm telling you guys, I went there and I didn't think any of this was true.
Right.
And afterwards, I'm like, oh my God, like I was scared of even going through. It was weird. It was like, what just happened to me, right? And when I came back from that, it was just one thing after the other of like meeting all these amazing, beautiful spiritual leaders, and getting on my own path myself. Like the clarity brought me to the place where I needed to go every time. Like, and it was some of the decisions I had to make from that was losing almost everything. So there's a lot of detachment that was involved with that.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely relate to what you're saying. Not so much with the John of God experience, but my experiences with ayahuasca, then having to relate them afterwards to people. I went in as the biggest skeptic on this planet, let me tell you, biggest skeptic. Completely analytical, factual. Don't try and tell me anything unless you have the facts to prove it. And boy, did it pull the rug out from under me, and it completely changed my viewpoint on it. Completely.
Yes, and I think
very grateful for it.
Yeah, no, me too. And you know what? I think that's the main thing that it does for people. It gets you out of your one way of doing your linear analytical mind. Because even though I'm not probably as analytical as other people, I do feel that I'm so controlling that if for me, it wasn't really show me the facts. For me, it was, is it going to be, I was just telling a friend about this the other day. When you have trauma in your life, there's usually, it's crazy how you see life. And there's really through two lenses. Either you're safe or you're not safe.
Right.
Every single decision that you make is from that point of view. And it's a very hard way to live, because then you're making a lot of your decisions from there, instead of, I might be unsafe in this situation, like ayahuasca, because it is a risk, right? Or like going to John of God and being left alone in Brazil, or, like, it's funny. I mean, I go back into I went to the Himalayas years after, right after COVID, and I know this is controversial right now, but I'm not going to go into the full thing that's happening with the Dalai Lama, but I lived with him and his monks for months. And I can tell you, I mean, the things that I was exposed to, even going to one of the most dangerous roads in the world, where I thought I was going to die just getting there after 14 hours of going through the Himalayas. And I've exposed myself to things that most people, I had friends even tell me, like, Gato, you're a single mom. Why are you doing these things? And I would tell them, I said, because I am teaching my son that when want to heal, or when you want to just live in your purpose, you just jump out of the cliff. And when you trust, there's a lot having that your universe, God, whatever you want to call it, has your back. That's what it's when I take the leap of faith, I do it. It's just sometimes it takes me a lot to get there.
Yeah, and this is, this is a quote I've mentioned in other interviews, that it's by far my favorite quote by Joseph Campbell. And it's, the cave that you fear to enter holds the jewels that you seek. And really, this whole channel is really about that. It's about those journeys that so fearful about, and that require a massive amount of strength and courage and bravery. But the payoff, once you're able to step into it and go through the journey, it pays a million times over.
And I'm about to enter a new one. So you're interviewing me in a really good time, because as I'm talking, and thank you for reminding me of that, of Campbell's quote, because I go to that one a lot. So it's funny you mentioned it, because I'm reminding myself that I can do the next step, which is huge. I'm literally leaving my 22-year profession to do this as full time, and I'm scared, and I wouldn't use the right word because it's not appropriate. I'm really scared right now of doing it. So because it's funny, it's I know that it's for something better, right? But it's still a leap of faith. I mean, when you either leave, what it is it's sometimes we get very comfortable with our story in the moment, right? And it's rewriting chapters or writing new ones. It's not always like this beautiful transition of, oh, it's just the next one. Yeah.
No, you're right.
I'm about to get into the cave again. That's for sure.
And I'm right behind you.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank you for that.
Of course. All right. So we've spoken about where you were mentally, physically, emotionally after these experiences, but where were you as far as the cancer went?
What cancer?
Wow.
That's my answer. Well, yeah, I mean, right now I'm talking to a gentleman. Actually, I just connected with him yesterday. So it's really beautiful. I can talk about this already. That has very few months to live. And it's interesting because before that experience, I would have connected with him from this place that, okay, let's find you the best doctor, let's find you the best hospital, let's find you all this, I would have gone in that mode, because I have actually a lot of people in my support group sometimes will reach out because of the mindfulness and other things. And I used to get in that mode sometimes with them, but now I can tell you, and I thought about this last night, I think in the middle of the night, of course, there's a chance that like this person can die whenever the doctors say, okay, there's a chance that I'm not going with it. that I do too from cancer, right? Again. And I'm saying this out loud, and I'm not even feeling fear anymore. Before I couldn't even say it. Because I think it is when, and Anita Morjani is a person that I learned from this, because she has a great and beautiful story of a near-death experience, and she goes around and even helps empaths, right, and sensitives with this topic.
Yeah, incredible book. It was called Dying to Be Me, right?
Dying to Be Me.
Yes,
I have it right here. I have it here on my desk, because I give it sometimes to my clients to read. And one thing that she taught me, because I saw her in Sedona 6 months ago and actually got to talk to her for a little bit, and I told her about mine was immediate near-death experience of like seeing all that, but in some way it was more in the living form, right? And she said something to me that stuck with me, and that's to answer your question. I think that's what happened with the cancer. She said, sweetie, I think you had a spontaneous remission. And I said, what is that, right? Because I'm like, I read a lot about this stuff, and I never that. And she's like, why don't you read Quantum Healing from Chopra? And I'm like, okay. So I read that book, and he talks a lot about that. And then right now, I went this past weekend to an ashram in Bahamas to meet Dr. Shamini Jain, who actually does a lot of research, not just with Chopra. They did a lot on spontaneous remissions, and we talked. I had lunch with her one day, and she goes, yeah, I mean, you definitely had a spontaneous remission, not for having a tumor in your body, but even without it, if not it coming back from the metastatic point of view. And I was telling this gentleman that I'm speaking now about it, and it was crazy to hear his voice change. He's like, huh. And he's like, I Googled it last night when you told me about it, because we were chatting first and then we spoke on the phone. And he said, I don't know, it was not just hope what I felt. It was more of this the power of the mind is beautiful.
Yes.
And it's exactly what I wanted you to get from that. And, and the other thing that I always tell people, as cheesy as it sounds, I mean, what really healed me, people ask me, what do you think really healed you? I get that question sometimes. And I said, love. That's my 4-letter word. Love, love, love. And it was not love because I was in a relationship. It wasn't love, not even, for my son, a lot of it, but mainly finding myself again and loving myself again. I would have not been able to survive if I didn't want to live.
Right. And the living and dying, like, I just want to backtrack a little bit before we go into the spontaneous remission part of things. I feel like there's such a stigma attached around the act of dying, right? It's as if society in general just wants to look away from it all the time, right? And I'm at the moment taking this very deep dive, reading The Road to Eleusis and The Immortality Key by Brian Marescu. And there was a beautiful quote in it in relation to psychedelics and the experience of psychedelics. And the quote was, if it gets a bit, but it goes, so if you experience dying before you die, you won't die when you die.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that just gave me chills. Wow, that's beautiful. I've never heard that before.
And so and they were talking about the experiencing your own death while you're still alive, like consciously experiencing your own death. That when the moment does come, you don't die.
Oh, wow. It's funny, you just gave me an image. I'm very visual. So weird. I was just yesterday browsing through one of the, I'm not a person that goes a lot to social media because I can be, because I'm a sensitive, right? It can affect me a lot. So I do it mainly because of my business, but I was actually looking for something, and there was this, one of the groups, it was one of the Tibetan monk groups that showed up on my phone, and they had a man that recently died, and he's a monk, one of the very, like, up there monks, that he was, I think, almost 90 years old. And he was in meditative position, and I thought he was alive, and they were just showing a monk meditating, but he was dead. He had been dead for the last week or almost 40 days. And I promise, look, because what I'm saying sounds really morbid, but actually for the first time, it's funny you're saying what you just said, because I know that man probably experienced what you were saying. And physically, he was not, you would think that he was decomposing, that he would look even, like we think of people that are dead.
Yeah.
He looked alive. It was insane. The color of it have not turned. And after like 3-4 days, and then I'm very curious about stuff. So I did research behind that a little bit quickly yesterday. And apparently when you go through these things in life where you do become in a way more awakened. The word enlightenment is really big, right?
Yeah.
But at least you're awakened, right? And somewhere or another, I think when you die, there is this, I don't know, the less more, I think that you just keep the light. I almost feel like, right, with you would keep a candle just going inside of you. And it's proven that energetically, because I just went to get trained again with my BioWell with energy field scanner, and they have done studies where the body, the energy goes down to 0 in the moment of death, but then it goes up again. And for like 3-4 days, it's up like you were alive. It's crazy what happens.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the quote that I mentioned, they were referring to it more as a sort of regeneration of consciousness in a way. It's dying, but kind of being reborn into something else or some other.
But that's what I mean. I think our body even has the power to show that. That's what I saw in this monk. I was in my head is exactly what you're talking about, is that because of where he had probably experience with meditation, with whatever work with his mind that he had been doing probably since he was a kid, right? Then his body was not showing death. It seemed like he was still alive. It was like, and who knows, what happens after, but we could talk, that's another topic. But I do love what you said, because I think that there's things that we do in our lives, well, especially when there's very strong spiritual paths, that these moments of death and even NDEs and other they really, and this is what Anita Marjani says, right? I mean, they're rebirths at a different level. And what happened to me, and this is why I was able to thrive and now become a healer, right, from it, is that you connect so much with purpose that honestly, like the leap of faith that I'm about to take, even though I'm scared, which is funny because part of it is ego, right? Because I don't really have a choice. I feel like it. I think that it happened for me. So I had to take some of the pressure away. I'm not going to lie. I even went through survivor's guilt. I had to do therapy on survivor's guilt from this because I'm like, why me? I mean, why am I, like, oh, because I'm deciding to be a healer. That's not even talking to the gentleman yesterday. I had a little bit of it. I'm like, he's talking to me that he admires my path, and I feel pressure of I better do right for him. But I feel like sometimes we have to be very compassionate with these experiences and say, you know what, that question doesn't matter because there's no answer for it. Why me? I mean, it's why not me, right? How dare I not right now show my gifts or share the tools, or how dare we sometimes not live the life that we were all deserve to live. So there are so many lessons behind that. It's beautiful. I mean, death can be a very beautiful gift.
And so a lot of people, sort of talk about spontaneous remissions, but then there's the miracles word attached to it, right? And there seems to be a lot of skepticism and disbelief and all of that. And I wanted to check in with you and first of all, hear your thoughts on spontaneous remissions, and then how you feel that, the idea of miracles and science are related to each other.
So to answer your first question about what, I think about or know of spontaneous remissions, that honestly, this term came to me recently, wasn't that long ago. And then I talked about Dr. Shamini this past weekend. So with spontaneous remissions, pretty much is what's happening is you're after you make the decision, because first is the decision, right? And that's why when you ask me when did I ever want to give up, yes. But when I made the decision that I never wanted to give up again and I wanted to live and not be beyond that, I wanted to live like I was living. Your mind, what it does, it literally will start healing you. And of course, I can go on and on about what happens with us energetically with that. But there's this want from a different place that is not just surviving, like I said, that starts healing your body. I mean, the way, I went through this for a very long time. And I think part of my fatigue was also from that, is that I blame myself a lot for being so mean to my body, right? I was like, how can I do that? When I understood that we can get ourselves that sick, and then I realized what a waste of energy, because it doesn't really happen already. So I turned it around. I really transmuted all of that energy. So when you're doing a spontaneous remission, whether it's spontaneous, like they know for people of like just going through ayahuasca experience and whoop, the tumor goes away, or going through, like I was mentioning with John of God, where people were walking, were all of a sudden literally brought from the dead almost. That's a more of a spiritual, right? A spontaneous remission. Then there's more of the mind. I know that Chopra in his book on quantum healing talks a lot about that he had a patient with cancer actually, and she had gone to one of her centers, and after a month, I think she had like 14 tumors in her liver, she had 0, right? And the funny thing about that story, to kind of show the contrast, is that when the woman came back to her oncologist, the oncologist said, that's miracles, like it's going into your second question, right? Yeah, we've seen miracles here and in whatever hospital she was in. But here's the thing about miracles. They're not, they might be temporary, and more than likely you will get your cancer back. He told her this. A month later, her tumors were back because she was so scared. So that's how our mind is, right? And so for the miracle part of it, and I think doctors, and that's what Dr. Sharma and I were talking about, are more open to understanding the spontaneous remissions, because when you do put them in the miracle box, and now we have made it very woo-woo, right? Very like, this is from something else, and like someone was protecting us, and more, and all of that I believe in. But what I do believe the most, and this is where as a healer, I've always tried to bridge spirituality and science. That's why I have a bio, right? I've tried to show people that miracles do happen, but who make them happen with whatever other help that we believe we're getting, and we are, is ourselves. And that's when we empower ourselves. So finding that balance, and I'm glad you asked me that question, between we can heal ourselves, and however we do it, it's very personal choice, but it's at bottom line, it's a decision in our mind. And like I said, even going to 20 motion, it's love frequency.
Right. And Carolina, so you are 100% cancer free today.
Yes.
Amazing. And, I'd like to also mention another thing that, I don't want people to get the wrong impression at the same time, right? That yes, there are spontaneous remissions. Yes, there are miracles. There are all of that, but there is also the part of medicine and the component that plays in all of this.
100%. And I do thank you for saying that, because I mentioned it at the beginning, but I'll say it again, is when I talked about Gleevec, I talk about my chemo with a lot of love.
Mhm.
Yes, at one point I was like, I can't do this anymore, but it took me 12 years, right? I mean, and I do see people, I have met people that have had remissions from not doing any treatment, but
Mhm.
they have changed their lifestyle completely. I mean, from even the air they breathe, they have moved to a healthier, right, environment. But most people that I know that have healed from cancer have done a combination of both. So I feel
so
that
medication plays an
100%.
important role in it too, and has created the cure in some cases too.
Yes, because the way I saw, at least for me with Gleevec, it was, if you want to, sometimes people get a little bit triggered with this, but I'll explain it. I think it's easier to understand.
Sure.
It was God sent. I felt that my medication was also part of something that was sent for me to heal. Because if I just saw it as a pill that I took every day, I don't think that I would have like dealt with it in the same way. You have to know that this medication is healing you. I was trained early on, thank God, through meditation, to give an intention. And when I would take every pill, I would thank it. And some days I was angry with it, but I would go back to gratitude, and I would ask it to heal me every pill. And I used to take 8 pills a day. So that was part of it. The water that I drank, I would please help me cleanse. Like, I was very intentional about it. Our mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So back to your mind, what are your thoughts on near-death experiences? Because that's another whole arena, and so many people have experienced it and have spoken about it, including quite a few doctors and professors. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on near-death experiences.
So, I mean, like I mentioned briefly, for me, I don't know. I mean, probably if I tell my story, doctors will tell me it wasn't near death because you didn't immediately live, like had an accident, like Anita Morjani. She did have it with cancer, right? But she literally
was a doctor too, if I'm not mistaken.
She was a doctor too. Yeah. So she had, which I think makes the whole thing scarier, because can you imagine, you know exactly what's going on with your body? I mean, ignorance can be bliss sometimes.
Good point.
So I feel that for me, it was a slow MDE. I used to call it that. It was a slow near death, because I was giving a certain time to live. I did have a bucket list, like you see in the movies. It's funny, you're gonna laugh, but I'm never gonna forget the conversation that I had with one of my friends, because I was like, what? She was like, what's in your bucket list? Like, we're both like crying, right? And I show her my list, and we're like, wow, right? And one of the things that I had in there was to finish my master's degrees, right? And she's like, why would you want to finish your master's degree? You're thinking you're gonna die. Like, what would you want? And I told her, I said, because this is my bucket list to start living, not to die.
Amazing. Well said.
Yeah, and it was funny because I already knew, and I said it out loud, and it was really not me. Those moments you say things, and you're like, huh, it wasn't me. And then it changed the whole thing. So for me, I mean, near-death experiences, I feel like you can have them in different forms. Now, one of the things that I actually experienced Anita Morjani's near-death experience, because she does this meditation with her audience when you go to, I don't know if you've been to hers. It's amazing. Like, she'll there's a term, and I can't remember right now with them what the name of the meditation is, but she puts you, it's almost hypnosis state, where she hypnotizes the audience, and she takes you step by step of a near-death experience. There are people that walk out of the room on those things, because it gets scary. It does get to a point that you get into death.
Experiencing death.
And it's like, I remember I was shaking. My whole body was like, and more than scared, I felt like vertigo of like, and then when she takes you to the other side, you feel so, I think this is the scary part about near death. Going to the other side, and I know there's tons of research now behind this. Most people that have these experiences, when they go to the other, they feel so much love, so much love. And I did experience that, by the way, with ayahuasca when I came out of it. It was that sense of, oh my God, like, why did I ever think I wasn't loved? Like, and it's not coming from anyone else than me and something bigger, right? And because
loved and connected and part of the whole. And
yes, and part of, and the interconnectedness, that's really what you feel. And that's what Anita said, I never felt more interconnected, right? With life, so we did that, and I was like, whoa. And the main thing that you also, I think, learn from that is that death is not the end, right? So it's really, we have made death so morbid and dark. That's why when I saw that thing, the monk, before I would have been like, oh my God, this is horrible, like, poor guy, like, why did they let him meditate that, right? And yesterday I thought of it, and I'm like, whoa, it looked beautiful to me. It was like, how beautiful it is that you literally die meditating and you can still be this enlightened being even after that, right? And I'm not going to lie to you. There are times that I still, and last year was the year for me to work on fear of death. And that's why I actually, and it wasn't, nothing's an accident, but it was interesting that I met Anita Margenio. That wasn't planned for me. And we talked, and when I asked her, I said, do you ever get scared of dying? Because you know what it feels like. And she goes, sweetie, that's why I'm not scared of it. And I started bawling, like right now, I'm like, I get emotional, because when she said that to me, I was like, oh, whoa, you're right. Why am I, this experience that happened to me, whether it was near death, or like I call it the slow near death, it doesn't matter. This is what I need to feel, is that, why am I scared of something that I know is a beautiful thing? And the other side, and these people have to tell the stories that it really is, you know, for most. I mean, we really can't prevent any of it, but, you know.
So where does that put you today?
That's what I'm saying. It's funny that you're doing this with me today, Gaia, because I am, like I said, about to get in the cave to see the jewels on the other side. And I want someone to dangle one of the jewels right now, because I'm scared. And I'm being very compassionate with myself right now. So I think it puts me right now in a place of really applying everything that I teach, everything that I've used, because life does that. Until we fully learn lessons, it's going to put it in places where we have to practice. So I feel like I'm practicing a lot right now. And not every day I feel like today that I'm like, I can do this and I'm going to do it. You know, some days I'm like, oh my God, I'm tired. I don't want to think, why am I putting myself in a position like this? But I think, you know, where it puts me in a place where I am a walking example, and there's so many out there, you know, like us, that not only miracles happen, but more than that, like I said, and this is always my little cliche motto, is that love heals us, and that it, you know, just coming back to ourselves. You know what is the main thing that I think I've learned from all the pandemics and other things going on around us, is that life is too short. And one of the Buddha quotes that I like to always end my interviews with is, he was teaching one of his apprentices, and they were having this beautiful conversation about life, death, and other things. And Buddha looked at him, to make the long story short, and said, the problem is, and he stopped, right? And the apprentice was like, he probably thought he was going to say, the problem is like, you know, like, you're doing everything wrong, or you think you have time, he said to him. And it's not to think that, oh my God, I have to live life like I don't have time.
Right.
But I think we have to live life knowing that we can make the best of this very short life that we have. And that's where I'm at. I want to make the best of what was gifted, and live in my purpose. I'm done, and I'm actually kind of like fed up, I'll use those words, of not fully living in my purpose. So I'm ready.
Good. We're all ready. World is waiting for you. So Carolina, speaking of the world, if you had one important message for the world, what would it be?
Other than love heals.
Mhm.
I think one of the most important messages I have for the world is to always find yourself back home. And when I mean like that, it's just in a very, again, I'm a cheesy person, I'm sorry, to always come back to oneself, whatever that means for us, whether it's higher self or just ourselves, our inner child.
Mm.
I think that's where we find everything we need. We're, a society that looks so much for external validation nowadays, whether it's a like on Facebook or someone to see or hear us, which are human, behave is a human need. But I think one thing I've learned, and after 6 million certifications, I keep on was looking for courses and things to get me in this place of a good healer and coach, and I keep on reminding myself that I already have what I need. And yes, all these things are useful, but I think that's what makes us truly human. This human experience goes back to being ourselves and being authentic and vulnerable.
And listening and trusting yourself. I feel
Yes.
the exact same.
Mhm.
And it's such a great message. I've also done, I don't know how many courses and read books and whatever else, but really what I'm circling back to is that when I sit with myself, I already know the answers. Then
Yeah.
it's a question of whether I want to do them or not, but
Yeah, that's a different. And
but
then
I
we
know what
use,
to do. I'm
yeah, and then we use, as another thing I learned from Buddhism is the combination of wisdom and compassion. Because a lot of times we want to use our wisdom, right? We want to be wise, we want to be smart about it. I always hear people tell me, but be smart about it. I have friends that have told me about my decision now, right? They're like, just be smart. And I'm like, that's funny we say that, right? Because truly it's a combination of being smart and also listening to our hearts and our intuition. I teach people here in this office I use a heart math method, right? Great Braden teaches it too. And I even have a little apparatus because I love little machines. And I teach people to have coherence. And it's crazy how when we get coherence for the brain and the heart, you can ask one question after like train your brain to do that, and you feel it in your heart immediately. Who needs pendulums? Who needs it? I mean, they're so it's all within us. You're right, so right. It's all the answers are all inside of us. So thank you.
Beautiful. Well, I would love to continue. I mean, this is a topic of discussion I can continue for hours about, but unfortunately we're going to have to start wrapping things up. And I wanted to ask you, do you have, I know you've mentioned, throughout the interview, you mentioned different books that you've read, that you've gotten a lot out of. And I know for myself, I've come across books that have been life-changing to me, books, videos, talks, whatever it is. I would love to hear if you have any recommendations that have been, instrumental in your journey or life-changing for you, or that you would like to recommend.
It's so funny because I don't know, I don't know if you had that on the list of questions, but if you didn't, I had it ready for you. So there's this one of the books that actually I don't remember when I read this book. It was read about 3 years ago. I actually have it with me because I wanted to show it to you.
The Untethered Soul.
This book has one of the big ones for me. And actually this one is a journal. So the book comes with a journal. Okay. So I do use this one with clients. It's beautiful because it gives you prompts. And this one, I don't know, I feel that it talked about so many topics in one, and it made it very simple way to put everything together. Even I put it out because they had mindfulness exercises at first, but then when I read the book that came with it, I'm like, oh my God, I think I've listened to it. I've read it twice. This is one that it's my go-to a lot. The Anita Moorjani's book, not only the Dying to Be Me, but the other one that is Sensitive is the New Superpower or something like that. That was a beautiful one if you are an empath or a sensitive person. A lot of us that are healers and teachers, we are. So, and that label has been thrown a lot. But if you truly believe that you're a person that is very sensitive to whether it's energy, senses, or like emotions, that's a great book. The other one,
I think you mentioned Quantum Healing.
I mentioned that like 3 or 4 times because it really changed me. The other one that that's Deepak Chopra.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's one of his shorter books because MetaHuman is a beautiful one. It's a little complicated to read, but it's one that really made a difference for me because it talks about the power of the mind a lot. The other one that came to mind, and I don't want to forget, oh my God, it was from, oh, Dr. Shamini, the one I mentioned her a couple of times during
Okay.
the session. Healing ourselves in the biofield is a beautiful one that makes us understand how we can heal with our own energy.
Healing ourselves in the biofield.
Yes, that one's a great one. Oh my God, there's so many because I'm a very avid reader. But there was one that when you asked me came to mind too, and it just slipped my mind. But if you want, I mean, I'll definitely, throw more out there as they come.
Sure, if you can send it through to us, that would be great.
Yeah, no, because there are, oh, I know. Oh, I was not going to sleep, but then I remember this one. The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes, incredible book. Highly recommend to you.
Yes, because that's one of the ones that I first read after deciding to stop the chemo, because a friend gave it to me. She goes, okay, now that you made this really crazy choice, let's understand what happened, right? And it talks about the connection between emotions and
and how trauma unfolds in the body.
yes.
Yeah.
And that one is huge because especially for cancer patients and other diseases too, but it's so directly connected to trauma that it's important. That's one that I recommended to the gentleman I'm mentoring right now, because I feel that it's almost, what it takes away, like not only reading those type of books, but anything that has to do that are trauma informed books. It really makes us look at it with a lot more compassion instead of that it happened for us, not to. I love reading books that made me feel that happened for me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all those recommendations. I'm looking forward to reading some of them. And Michael Singer's one of my favorite authors. I read The Surrender Experiment by him.
Oh my God, that was amazing.
One question, if people would like to make contact with you or have questions for you, can they put them in the comments below, or can they contact you directly? Is that okay?
Yes, please. I mean, this is what I'm here for. I would love to share, beyond my story, anything that I can, send out there to help, not only healing journeys, because sometimes the word it almost seems like we're broken. It's really, for me, they're thriving journeys, right? They're learning too, right? Learning journeys. So if I can be part of anyone's, please count me in. I'm part of your team.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that and your openness in it. And Carolina, I would like to take a moment to really thank and acknowledge you from the bottom of my heart. Really, spending this hour with you has been an absolute gift for me, and it's been a joy, and it's been an incredible conversation. And I knew briefly about your journey, but I didn't know the details of it. And I really want to thank you for sharing it with so much courage and with openness, and for the strength that you've had through it, and for the fearlessness, and for, really how open your heart is in sharing all this information, because I get how difficult and challenging some of it was, and having to revisit it, from this side of things now. You've been an absolute inspiration to me, and I'm sure you are and continue to be and will be an inspiration to so many others who are on similar journeys. And I want to congratulate you. Oh my gosh, congratulations on being here, on being cancer-free. You mentioned something earlier about the gift of life, right? And I feel like we often forget, or often forget, or get distracted, or get annoyed, or whatever, and forget really what a precious gift this life is. And so I want to thank you for taking time to share moments of your precious life, and to spend an hour of our precious lives on this time together. Really and truly, thank you.
Thank you, Guy. I mean, those words, they touch my heart, and I don't mean that of like, yeah, I have been working on listening to all of this, coming back to me, and I'm very humbled because, yes, it's been hard, but at the same time, it's it's really for these moments. And I'm not gonna cry because I'm like, if I get emotional, but
We can cry here too.
no, I do, because it's not right. You talk about these, and sometimes when I tell my story, it's like almost telling someone else's story.
Yeah.
But when I tell it, it's like it's a beautiful moment, like you said, to connect with life, and we all have stories, and we all can stand here and talk about it before and after. So I love that we can humanize all of this, right? Even NDs and miracles and all these other things. So thank you. The questions were actually touched my soul, and you do too. The minute that I met you and your name, I was like, oh my God. I connected with you on a different level, and I really mean that. And I can't wait to go to Singer's Temple with you. So
That's
thank you for
Wednesday.
thank you for the connection. And I feel like you and I are going to continue doing a lot of, collaborate in other ways. I feel like sometimes you meet your soul sisters in this life.
Yes,
So I
well
appreciate
said.
it. What you're doing is beautiful, Gaia, and you are changing lives yourself. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. Very, very much received. So I wanted to say to the people listening, if you have enjoyed this content and enjoyed spending time with us, it would mean a huge amount to us if you liked or subscribed or shared the content. And we'd love to hear your comments. If you have questions for Carolina or would like to connect with her, feel free to put your comments below. And I'm looking forward to having another session like this and continuing our conversation. And Carolina, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaia. Thank you for everyone that's been listening and asking questions and connecting with us as well. What Gaia is doing is amazing. So definitely subscribe. Thank you so much.